website called the FreshWater Accountability Project, and it's growing and there's a lot going on. Of course, most people know us as adamantly opposed to all the fracking that's taking place. We first began by trying to protect our beloved Lake Seneca from being fracked, and we provided a hydrogeologist report that justified our concerns that the long laterals left underneath with up to 80% of radioactive and toxic waste that's put down under there could eventually come back and make it a kind of a very difficult problem to clean up. And there's also groundwater supplies, and we're growing in our organization here in Ohio because there have been now documented cases of actual groundwater contamination, and of course there's always spills and dumps and things like that that go on with this industry. I'm going to shorten my remarks because I'm sure everybody will appreciate at this point. What I will do is give an electronic copy that you can give to the judges, and I'm kind of outline this because some of this is about the lack of checks and balances that we've witnessed. We believe that the board has overstepped its bounds. It's not really operating for public trust. We believe that our water supply is a very precious and valuable commodity that must be better protected for the future. I am a fracking refugee. I'm living in an untenable situation in Northwest Ohio with my daughter and my 13-year-old granddaughter, which is not very easy to do. I'm hoping to return to Seneca Lake. I'm hoping that there's something that we can do to protect ourselves. And locally, now I'm on the board of the Ohio Community Rights Network. We got a meeting in Columbus that's associated with CELDEF, and they're doing a lot to restore local control. We're working in Barnesville to try to prevent a dump to go in that would just bring in toxic and radioactive waste, not only from the Utica, but from Marcellus and other hotspots. We are building a documentary a resource for people in the area to be able to support them, to be able to protect themselves locally. That's what we thought a Conservancy District would do, and that's why we were glad to pay our taxes up until this point. I fully support Cambridge to be able to receive water from Seneca Lake. I believe it was a couple years ago during a drought that they needed that water. I think they're going to need it even more so, because we can see already the impact of the withdrawal of massive amounts of waters from the watershed. We're very concerned about that. We're concerned about losing environmental flow. We're concerned about the acid mine drainage that's already taking place. There is already contamination. In fact, I saw a report that there's cancer clusters in the Cambridge area. We don't know where that's coming from. But I attended a watershed meeting in which the ODNR representative said that the public taxpayer was going to be paying for remediation for acid mine drainage into perpetuity. And that alarms me because I see the similar situation being set up by fracking. Once this boom becomes a bust, we're going to be left with what's left. And that's not only just the long laterals that could be leaking and migrating over time, it's also the injection wells. And the way the industry rhetoric works and says fracking has not caused water contamination is directly misleading. Okay, we'll grant you maybe that instance of fracking, but the cement casings, my husband is a materials science engineer with a PhD, and he knows how well steel does not like concrete over time. So we're going to be left with a mess. And then I'm wondering too, if the Conservancy District might think that they could raise taxes to pay for any type of civil suits or damages that would be very expensive to remediate. We're also documenting our concerns to the Army Corps, to the State Emergency Response Management people about subsidence, especially next to dams. So all of this brings us here once again. We thought maybe we could do another rally. There's people that wanted to be here, but there's, you know, it's kind of a very, I have to say from my heart, it's very hard to continue to try to do this, and we have better things that we'd rather do ourselves on a beautiful day like this, and I certainly don't want to trump up anything additional for myself that I don't have to do, but I've been waiting to be proven wrong on some of this, but there's mounting evidence that proves us right. And this is what we would like this board to consider, and we really do appreciate that. So we have been working with FracTracker, a number of other organizations. I'm also on the board of Buckeye Forest Council. And we are seeing the water impacts in other areas. And in Texas, where they've been fracking quite heavily, there are water wars that are taking place right now. We are exercising the precautionary principle. I hope to return to Seneca. I still hope to be able to save it. I really hope that we will preserve our water for drinking water supplies, for recreation, and for agriculture, and for industries that are going to be here for the long run. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Harper. Dr. Auch, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you for having me. So I'm going to just read from a prepared statement. The FracTracker Alliance, which is where I work, we're a gun, the Hoover Foundation funded nonprofit looking to fill in the environmental, socioeconomic, and health-related data gaps associated with shale gas drilling in the U.S. A statistician once said, in God we trust, everyone else bring data. Well, FracTracker is the latter. We think the data quality, frequency, intensity are going to be crucial to you all figuring out how to manage this shale gas play. So I've been working a little bit with Leah and Terry to try to figure out, well, they brought it to me, the whole idea of water extraction from the Muskingum Watershed. And the thing that struck me was that it seems like, and I'm editorializing a little bit, is that the environmental economics and the watershed resilience components of the conversation are sorely lacking. I believe strongly that, I'll present some data to speak to this. The shale gas industry is so intensive when it comes to water that their footprint cannot be measured and cannot be priced the way that we traditionally price water. We all know they're pulling water out of the watershed, injecting it into the ground, and the stuff that comes up is in dramatically different quality than what went down, right? So what I'd like to present to you a little bit is a little bit of data that I've been working on to compare and contrast West Virginia and Ohio. And why West Virginia? Because it's in my opinion that West Virginia is going to be relying on your watershed for quite a while, and the trend there is equally disturbing. So we looked at West Virginia and Ohio. We looked at 420 wells in Ohio and 575 wells in West Virginia. It's a pretty big data set, and we're pretty happy with it. What we found is that the industry in Ohio is averaging about 5.3 million gallons per well right now. In West Virginia, 6.2 million gallons per well. Gulfport and Anadarko are some of the major players in this with regard to being the outliers in the high end. Both of those companies account for most of the wells that are using in excess of 8, 9, 10 million gallons a well. And I understand that they're going to be intimately involved in the sale of water here in the watershed. The nominal percentage of water that is recycled has declined from 7.27 or 7.46% of all water at a rate of 0.537%, right? So sometime next year we're going to be talking about wells that are going to be using less than 5.5% recycled water. So there is no incentive, and this brings in the environmental economic component. There is no incentive for the industry to use less water. There's no regulatory or Wall Street or Oklahoma City incentive for them to use any less water. What we have found in our research is that, interestingly enough, there's an inverse relationship between productivity. So the wells that are more productive are using less water. The ones that are on the peripheral of the play are using more water. Again, editorializing a little bit, I think that what's happening is these guys are investing, what, $6.5 to $8.5 million per well pad. They're calling up Oklahoma City and Pittsburgh and saying, we're not getting a return on our investment. What do we do? Well, what's the one thing they're actually not paying real market value for? It's not labor. It's not hydrochloric acid. It's not proprietary fuel. It's water. It's the one thing you're not paying the kind of market value for. So crank it up, and that's what we're seeing. These rates that I just mentioned in Ohio and West Virginia, so 5.3 million gallons in Ohio and 6.2 in West Virginia, are increasing at about 205 to 240,000 gallons per quarter per well. So sometime next year, our well will be north of 6.2 to 6.3 million gallons, and West Virginia is going to be north of 7. an incredible amount of water demand that I think is going to be increasingly relying on your watershed. It's quite disturbing. I would like to note, with that regard, I was impressed to see the folks that talked before me talking about land use change and increasing flooding, right? So you have a watershed that's facing pressure from a land use perspective, and we are transitioning from several small precipitation events with climate change to single large, or a couple of large events. These are the kinds of events that this watershed, the land use change and the Utica shale water extraction, are going to be increasingly, the pressures are going to grow increasingly. And I'm just worried that this watershed can't handle it, and I know that we in Terry are as well. The industry has used about 1.87 billion gallons of water so far. These values are expected to grow, depending on what you believe is the monthly permitting rate, to about 8.7 to 17 billion gallons of water. Put this in a perspective that we can all understand. This is about 8% of residential water usage across the 19 counties that we looked at. In Carroll and one other county that I'm forgetting, we're talking about north of 35% of residential water usage. So at some point, there's going to be a conflict between what people need and what the industry needs. Assuming the average capital expenditure per well is about 6.7 to 9.5 million gallons, or $1 million, we are talking about the industry spending 0.254% of capital per well on water. It doesn't make sense. There's no incentive for the industry to use water, and as I said, the recycled water is going down, and the overall water is going up. So you can see there's no market incentive for them to use less water. So, these pressures are going to grow and grow and grow. Let me see where else. Let's try to speed through this. So what we did with Leah and Terry was we asked the question: what percentage of the available water within the watershed is industry using right now? So we backed out what we all use, what the plants use, what the crops use, what the trees use, what everyone uses. And we said, what's left that comes into the system, minus the stuff that leaves as the evapotranspiration and leaves, assuming the watershed is a big bathtub, drains out of the system. What's left we call available water. And what we found is, depending on what you believe is the discharge rate out of the watershed, industry is using about 2 to 4.5% of total available water left in the system after everyone's taken their cut right now. Again, assuming 25 to 45 permits per month, sometime in the next 5 to 6 years, you're talking about 10% of available water. What is available water? It is the water, what I call hydrological seed corn. It's the stuff that gets passed down and down and down, that recharges aquifers, that increases or buffers your system against drought. And the more the industry uses that water, the less your watershed is resistant to drought. Let's see. Let's see. I'll probably go back to the prepared statement here. The only way to reverse this trajectory is to discuss accurate pricing of fresh water based on the above trends and real-time data, devoid of the pro or against fracking debate that tends to drive these conversations. Right? So this isn't a pro or against fracking presentation that I'm giving. Our nonprofit is very, very concerned about fracking. You would probably call us an anti-fracking group. But more importantly, this is a data question. This is a data quality and frequency question. And it's an accurate pricing question. Ohio's freshwater seed corn is being sold at a bargain basement rate, and this will not change unless we acknowledge that the Utica shale water usage is unlike current and past uses of water. A preponderance of the water remains far below the surface, as you all know, and is dramatically different and more often than not can be toxic when it comes back up as brine. So we've changed the water quantity and the quality of the water in your watershed. Given that Ohio already has an industry that produces a racing product in the form of its CAFOs, we now have another in the horizontal drilling industry, which is currently producing 1.1 to 1.2 units of brine, i.e. waste, per barrel of oil. Again, an industry producing more waste than product. Very disturbing trend there as well. In keeping with our mission of identifying and working to fill data gaps, we feel it is imperative that a third party begin to generate basic watershed data, including evapotranspiration, plant transpiration, precipitation as rain and snow, soil water content a variety of metrics that you guys, that everyone needs to understand if you're going to sell all this water, going forward. This data will go a long way towards identifying the true price of raw water rather than the externalities poor pricing scheme that it seems the MWCD is using right now. We believe that the MWC must immediately begin to monitor using those third parties. I've developed a metric to try to understand what would be necessary to measure these water components that I was talking about. We're talking about $160,000 to $180,000 for all the units, measuring units in the watershed. It's a nominal fee compared to what the numbers that we were talking about in those presentations.
You have a couple of minutes left.
Yeah, I'm almost. Let's see what else I'm going to say.